Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Time Studios with a massive head cold here in Florida on the 19th of April, 2022. It is an absolute delight to have in the studio with me a man who is running for office in the county next door. And we came to be introduced because I would like to introduce Chris Messina, who is running for mayor of Orange County. Chris, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. It's just great to be here. And as we were talking beforehand, it's just so meta to be interviewed by a fellow conservative, also living in Florida, very close by, and with the same name.
Yes, absolutely. And it came to be because as when I reached out to you or your campaign about a month ago, and this is what I love about the tiny, tiny world we inhabit. You know, I'm a partner with a gentleman in Australia for a mining venture in Greenland. And he got a call from one of our bankers in Hong Kong saying, what's going on? I mean, your man Messina, he's running for office in Florida. Like, what is he focused on this business? Like, what are you doing? And that, of course, led me to you. And I love the fact that not only are we in Florida, but we're in adjacent counties and you're running for mayor. So it took a lot of soothing because our investors are concerned that I was going to be distracted by managing Orange County, but it's you, thankfully, not me. So it'd be great to hear a little bit of background, like how you came to be where you are and why you're running. And
Sure. Yeah. So like you, we're originally my family. I have a wonderful wife, 3 incredible kids, 2 teens, and we have a surprise 3-year-old who really keeps us on our toes. But we were originally living in the Northeast, and we just saw some things going on there in terms of just mandates and all these things that really concerned us. And since we had been coming to Central Florida for 15 years, for 2 weeks every year, we finally decided to make our vacation paradise our full-time home. And that's how we ended up here. And we landed first in Kissimmee, which you would know, but it's a little further south. It's on the it's southwestern side of Orlando.
Right.
But then our 3 kids ended up all getting into a really good school, a Christian school in North Orlando. So then we moved up to where we're living, and that meant we moved into Orange County. And when we moved into Orange County, we discovered that the current mayor here, a guy named Jerry Demings, and is part of a democratic and not a center Democrat, a pretty far left Democrat family, was implementing many of the same things that we were trying to get away from, and why we moved to Florida in pursuit of freedom and with forced mandates. And then he followed that with a proposed massive sales tax increase, which we'll do, I imagine, a deep dive on, because it has significant economic implications for all of Central Florida, your county included.
Right.
And so that's why I decided, despite having no political experience, to run. My background has been, my experience was I came from a working class area of New Jersey, and then ended up on a construction crew after school because it was the only job I could get. And then I went from there to the technology industry and ended up working for a fairly large and rapidly growing computer technology company, joined the board of Big Brothers, became a Big Brother, and still in touch with my little brother, and then ended up at Harvard Business School, where I got an MBA. And after Harvard, I founded and led several med tech companies and helped in the creation of an regional industry association. And last point, and it's just on my background, is that when our first child was born with a disability, and my wife and I, we always said, whatever child God sends us, we will welcome. And God called our number. And we had a child who was born with a disability. So we set up an education foundation to help kids like him learn, and to empower other parents to help their kids with similar situations learn.
Oh, that's excellent. And in terms of medtech, was that part of why you're coming back and forth to Central Florida, because of the huge booming medtech area here?
Yeah, well, that's one of the attractions. There's a nascent, a small medtech industry here, you know, particularly with some focus around imaging, but it has potential for much greater growth. And many of the underlying reasons why we were able to create one of the most successful medical device industry clusters in New England exist here for IT-based manufacturing in Central Florida.
Right.
And so I think there's a real great opportunity to promote that and develop that. And we could take a deeper dive into that if you
Sure. I think we will. I want to circle back a little bit. So
Sure.
For those of us who completely understand what we mean when we say we had to get out of New York, right?
Yeah.
What were the specific things that were really sort of game enders for you, where you put up with enough, kind of like I'm from here, I like it here, my family goes back here, I've got roots, and all of a sudden it's like, no mas, I'm all out. What were the things?
Yeah. So the game enders, we were in Massachusetts. We were actually living in Cambridge, and so forced masking of kids in schools.
Right.
We disagreed with that. That was followed by, actually we left before the forced vaccination mandates came, but we saw it coming.
Yep.
And so that was coming. And also Massachusetts is pretty much a one-party state. You know, kind of run by Democrats. If there's a Republican, they're very Republican light, and in Massachusetts, for me, really the defining moment when I said I have to leave, and my wife has a different defining moment, but for me was when the legislature in Massachusetts signed at that time the most expansive abortion law in the country over a weak governor's veto. Even the governor, a weak Republican governor,
right,
vetoed it, and they overrode it. And I just thought, if this is the view that the legislators here have about life, this is not the culture for me.
Sure, and a powerful enough conviction that it was worth overriding a veto to get it done.
Exactly.
This is, you know, there's a huge nuanced spectrum on that topic, which we have time to go into, right?
Sure.
But what I have found startling is that kind of sort of radical adherence either way, right? I think Rick Santorum, for example, whether, again, I respect him for speaking what he believed, right? So I've got no problem with that. But in a nation where there's lots of different viewpoints, and there's lots of degrees of secularity, right? When he said unequivocally in response to a question about, would you support abortion in the case of a 12-year-old girl raped by her father? When he said no, he lost millions of votes. And again, that may be the right thing to do, is lose millions of votes, right? It might be. But I think that I remember watching that thinking, you could have couched that better. You could have started with, no one likes horrendous things. We hate it when evil people do horrible things to people. Our thoughts and prayers are with that girl, but I would really have a hard time even then. Just would have been a better answer. Yeah. It wasn't his answer. It's fine.
It wasn't a nuanced answer, you're saying.
It would have been a better answer. It would have been like, we all encounter, unfortunately, as adults, we will always encounter something for which there is no good answer, right? And that's part of being human. But I get that point of that was sort of a sticking point. And we got down here.
So that was in Massachusetts. It was the opposite. It was very extreme.
Exact opposite.
Very extreme. It was like up till birth, right? And you know, you're aborting babies past viability.
And they could never explain why that was so important to them, right?
Yeah,
they could never explain the weird edge case of the mentally incapacitated young woman who didn't even know she was, but like there are weird edge cases there too, where you might be like, well, but no, just that absolute, this has to happen, that rubbed people the wrong way, clearly.
And it's just indicative of kind of the culture up there. And
so what do you think?
And also you pay for it economically too.
Yeah. And do you think that a lot of that, leaving that particular topic, a lot of that sort of extremism
Yeah.
is inevitable always within a one-party state when people never ever have to compromise, never have to challenge or be challenged. Do you see that as one of the kind of leading indicators for where extremism will go?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think that's also a strong case for term limits, because what happens is you start to get politicians that ossify in place, and they have no incentive their incentives are all to maintain their position, not to do the right thing.
Right.
And so I would wrap those two things together to say that you do need opposition. You cannot, it's the definition of a dictatorship if there's no opposition, and if there aren't alternative thoughts. And it's also why free speech is so important, because you have to have ideas you disagree with. Yeah. And from people you disagree with, you don't dislike, saying things you disagree with, right? And sometimes you hear ideas that you may initially disagree with, but then when you reflect on them, if you're open-minded, it starts to refine your own position. And the issue with term limits is you get very settled, and you figure out, for politicians, they figure out what it takes to win. They build a big machine and they just hunker down, and there's no incentive to do sometimes the hard things that are the right things.
And that, I love that. That is the right exact statement, right? And I'm glad that people like you decided to run, because you take your expertise. Anyone that has created a business, there's lots of massively conflicting issues to deal with. Timely ones now, long-term view. How do you match the three? How do you make sure that you get payroll done this week while aiming for the long term? All those things which take a lot more challenging thought than any politician ever actually has to do. I'm glad that folks like you jump in. So one thing, which is actually, this will be helpful for me too, because I know that it exists, but I've never looked at the structure. Orlando is in Orange County.
That's correct.
So there's a mayor of Orlando, but then Orange County also has a mayor. How do those two offices interact?
So actually, Orange County is, you could almost think, it's a little bit like a feudal system. There are 11 different mayors of different sized cities, including Orlando. So there are other smaller towns, and so they have some local jurisdiction and control over things like parade permits and some local school control and some building. But really, Orange County mayor is the most important position. Orange County is the third largest county by population in the country. It's the one of the 5 most influential metro areas in the US. It has the 7th largest airport. The county itself manages a budget of over $5 billion. It's $5.2 billion and 8,000 employees. So it's a pretty significant endeavor covering many things. And as you may know, that there's the potential it gets even larger, because the Florida legislature is looking at removing the special distinction for Disney, which means that whole economic area, it's called Reedy Creek, would be folded into Orange County.
Right, because that, as all Floridians know, that was a special backroom smoke-filled cabinet room deal that gave that to Walt. He basically has his own feudal territory plonked down in the middle of the county.
They have their own, safety force, public safety force. So so that may be changing too. So that would mean another significant change and growth in the county government.
Oh, that's great. And so, I certainly can understand the temptations to run, and you have a wonderful spouse. My wife made me promise never to run for office. I almost took a role in the Trump administration, but
oh, really? Okay.
It didn't happen for a range of reasons. But partially her reaction, like, "What are you, crazy?"
Sure.
But I understand the urge to run, and quite frankly, I admire it, because if everyone treated running for office and doing something important the way they try to treat jury duty, well, you end up with the mess we get, right? You get the least common denominator. So you've been here only a few years, but the mismanagement you saw, I guess, was, I'm not putting words in your mouth. What was it that made you say, that's it, I can do a far better job than this guy's doing, and here's how we should go about it.
Sure. It was the moment when it was in October, I think it was October 15th, when Jerry Demings, the current mayor, who's part of this big Democratic family, along with Val Demings, very close to the Bidens, fired a guy named Stephen Davis, who is the fire battalion chief, who refused to turn in his firefighters who weren't vaccinated.
Right. Oh, and, right. I remember that. That was appalling. That was ridiculous.
Yeah, that was appalling. And actually, Stephen and I have become friends, and he's endorsed me in this campaign. But that was the moment when I said, someone has to run against this guy, and when no one was, that's when I started to feel a call to do it. And my family and we prayed about it. And you know, my wife said, she said, I'm really feeling like God's calling you to do it. And I was feeling that call too. And I tell you, it's not something you do lightly.
No.
The demands on your time, the roller coaster ride of what it's like to be in politics is pretty significant. And it's a different experience from business.
Yes, yes. What in large measure, because I remember I studied anthropology at the University of Chicago. I remember one of the greatest lines ever. One of my professors, who was responding to some sort of, you know, over the top vicious attack on him about some theory he had about, you know, linguistic nuances in the Kaya poem Brazil. Like, who could care? And he was a funny guy. And as he said to me, you got to remember, Christopher, the fights in academia are so vicious because the stakes are so low.
Yeah, I've heard that expression. That's a great expression.
It's a great expression. And similarly, for those in the media, you can take pot shots at politicians all day long with usually little to no consequence to you, right? So, in that sense, it's an asymmetric game. Have you already found that as the you know, Biden machine deciding you are an actual threat? Or are they still waiting to find out whether they should attack you vehemently the way they do Ron DeSantis all day?
Yeah, you know, so that's interesting. So pretty early on out of the gate. So I met Jerry Demings and talked with him at one of his tax forums, told him I was running. And we talked, and he said, you'll find out there are a lot of issues here. And I said, yes, I do know that. And that's where I'm going to focus on issues and policy, not personality and personal attacks. I said, will you agree to do the same? And he looked at me and he said, I'm very respectful to those who are respectful to me. Fair enough. And I said, fair enough. 2 days later, I heard I was a puppet of Republican operatives.
There you go. See, but then again, to be fair to him, you don't know in his twisted, you know, Democrat mind, that might mean he's being respectful to you. You might not be lying. But congratulations to being a puppet. That's awesome. It took 48 hours for you to be a puppet.
Yeah. There was a brief pause there.
Good for you. So in terms of, and I should know more, but I like to kind of have these chats kind of freeform.
Sure.
Is the Republican Party strongly behind you on this? Or are you still convincing them, or where are we with that?
So the Republican Party is strongly behind the message, and I have significant support within elements of the Republican Party. The challenge in Orange County is the Republican Party is kind of fractured. It looks like, and it looks a little bit like Virginia pre-Glenn Youngkin. You know, so one of the things that Glenn Youngkin did, and I've been fortunate that some of the great people who helped that great success there in Virginia have started to advise me. And one of the great things he did is he was able to bring together the disparate and conflicting pieces of the Republican Party in Virginia, and that really helped him win. So that's part of our strategy and our plans are to do everything we can to see the Republican Party here be united and work as a team.
That's excellent. And also, you're obviously aiming to pick up independents and others. So what are if you had to pick? I would love asking this. But you're running for office, so this is a good question. If you knew that you could only get 3 major things done in an administration, what are those top 3 things that matter the most to you? Okay,
so number one, there's a planned sales tax increase from 6.5% to 7.5%. And that is actually really significant for working families that are really on the edge and are so being so crushed right now by inflation and supply chain fractures.
Right.
So stopping that and right-sizing the government so that additional sales tax is not needed is number one. Number two is to set a policy, is to implement the policy that's already come out from Tallahassee with Governor DeSantis, that there will be, no matter what comes, no new mandates. We're not going to close playgrounds. We're not going to close small businesses. We're not going to lock down schools. We're not going to force people to take vaccines that for a variety of reasons may not be right for them. Right. So number two, we stopped that. Number three, Orange County is growing very fast. There are between 1,000 and 1,500 people a week coming to Orange County, depending which census you look at. The police force has not kept pace. So the current average of staffing recommended average is 1 to every 1,800. One sheriff's deputy or police officer for every 1,800 people in your county. We're closer to 1 to 4,000. And so what that means is, kind of out in the eastern part of Orange County, out close to where you are, right, in Brevard, that it can sometimes take up to 20 minutes for backup to respond to a police call. So the Orange County mayor does not hire that's the sheriff's department, but the Orange County funds
that, right?
Funds the sheriff's office. So we need to make sure the funding is adequate to provide for them. So those are the three things.
That makes all the sense in the world. Of course, you're also in those rural districts. One of the best things I found when I moved down to Florida was that all the stickers in every store window with a picture of a handgun that says, "We don't call the police." Yeah, that's a very excellent refresher from New York. But still, we like law and order. We don't particularly need vigilante.
We do, and obviously, Florida is a big freedom state. And the First Amendment's a critical part of our freedoms.
Yeah,
the Constitution is a sheer act of genius, and in times like we're living through, you see the genius of the Second Amendment.
Oh, absolutely. I used to live in Australia. I've got lots of friends in various parts of the world. And, I a lot of discussion back and forth on that about gun ownership. And after watching 2 years, I mean, the scenes, and again, these were, of course, they were the ones that made the headlines because they're so outrageous, but it happened often enough that there was plenty of footage, cops in the state of Victoria in Melbourne, Australia, tackling women walking alone without a mask on in a park. I mean,
it's insanity.
That's insanity. And I was speaking to my friends. I said, "Do you yet understand the Second Amendment? Like, Americans in many states bent over like sheeple and took it with this ridiculous lockdown, shut your business crap." Remember we had 2 weeks in March of 2020 when DeSantis, went along with the national hysteria and closed the parks. That day I woke up and I instantly went to my nearest park, hopped the gate, and went for a walk. Like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
Ridiculous, right? Luckily, his infection with that derangement lasted 14 days, and then we've been living free mostly.
Except in Orange County.
Yeah, well, we had the mask mandate here in the schools too. I fought viciously, and as my wife and I agreed on that, because sadly enough, we can read statistics. And I, had family in Northern Italy. So in January and February of 2020, I was getting the stats directly from the Institutes of Health. And I'm reading them. I'm like, average age of death for men was 79 and a half. Average age for women was 83 and a half. They all had pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
This used to be called life. You're old, you have cancer, you get a virus and die. We're shutting the schools for this. There's no daylight between us on that topic. But to me, what I found most fascinating, in which I guess if you were in Germany in 1938, you would watch this happening. You're thinking, this can't be happening. This is ridiculous. They're closing businesses. The governor of New Jersey is sending cops to arrest a man sitting alone on a beach reading. Because I told you to stay inside. And these little petty dictators, God, they got a whiff of power and they loved it.
Yeah.
They loved it.
They did. And they're, I think many of them are just itching to use that power again.
Oh, yeah.
And so we it's very important for our freedoms that we hold the people who have forced these mandates on us accountable.
Yep. And I like that you're one of the musicians, because my biggest concern now, and I, speak on this podcast, I write about it, is we cannot let them get away with pretending they were right and it quote unquote worked. They cannot be allowed to make that claim, and they are trying hard as hell right now. That in fact, oh well, the masks and the mandates and all this shit worked. Pardon my English. And so that's great, and we cannot allow that to happen, because separately, as but I'm glad you're fighting it, because working on Wall Street, Peter Wallison wrote this great book called "Bad History, Worse Policy" about Dodd-Frank, right?
Yeah.
The crash of 07, 08, 09 was caused by U.S. federal government housing policy, period. The Democrats and the media in lockstep instantly started saying it was greedy bankers, and they have managed to convince the population of that, and they passed Dodd-Frank, which destroyed many viable financial businesses. So when people ask me, why do I get exercised about this? Here's why. Because if you let them set what they call the narrative, they will create all kinds of damaging, insanely repressive laws. So I can't tell you how happy I am that's in your top three.
Or in this case, huge distractions, and I personally think that the whole Ukraine-Russia crisis could have been averted with some focused diplomacy. But I believe there are interests that actually wanted to see this conflict explode because it was a diversion from the failure of the COVID narrative.
Quite possibly, right? Yeah. One of the greatest books I ever read was this great historian who wrote a book called The New Dealer's War, right? And it was all about World War II. And once the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, well, sadly,
I mean,
but up until that, if you look at the history of FDR's cabinet administration and what they were doing leading up until Pearl Harbor to what the Biden administration is doing now, the parallels are terrifying.
Yeah.
Want to drag us into this war, and hopefully we'll get away from all that, and hopefully it will end soon. But the idea that they want to put on distractions, look over here, and at least FDR was good at it. The cheap nonsense of who in the Biden cabinet told him you should start calling this Putin's inflation. You really think the American people are that stupid?
And the difference with FDR was that the U.S. geared up its factory production, and we're doing the opposite. I mean, we're suppressing our energy production. We've blown up the energy sector. And when I say we, it's not the average American.
No, the administration.
It's the current group in the White House.
Yep. Yeah. So in terms of, I like that platform, and I assume you spend a lot of time. Clearly, it's your conviction set, right? You're not going to just do something because polling tells you to. But in terms of, what sort of traction are you getting? And is there kind of early polling now, or is it what's the state of where?
So what we're finding, we don't have formal polling, but what we're finding is that our message is really resonating with a really critical swing block. And that's the Hispanic American community here in Orlando. So Orlando, many people don't know that Orlando has the largest population of Puerto Rican Americans outside of Puerto Rico.
Yep.
Huge block. It's 42% Hispanic. And the messages, and my message of, family, faith, freedom, and economic security is really resonating with the Hispanic community. And so, we are getting that kind of great feedback. And so we're very optimistic that we can win and beat the big machine.
That's awesome. And in terms of funding, is there kind of funding parity to where you are with what Demings has, or is it
well, so we just started. So our first financial reporting month was March. And we're the top fundraiser for that month, for March. So we outraised Demings or Mayor Demings in March, and then there's another guy who's very distant in terms of in terms of the fundraising. So we've done pretty well, and but you can always do better. And
Right.
one of the things that I'm learning and didn't really know before I took this foray into politics is just how important the fundraising is. So if any of your if any of your listeners want to support our campaign, they can go to chrismessina.com.
Yeah, we'll put that in the link below. Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. And you can learn more about our campaign. And if you feel inclined to make a donation to help us get our message out, that would be much appreciated.
That's huge. And I like the additional reason for the prohibition against new mandates is it was. I always got a PhD in child psychology. We've got 3 kids. We're all teenagers now, so my own special religious burden. They're wonderful, wonderful kids, hardworking, and their experience was. I was interviewed on a radio show in New York about 2 months ago by someone who was asking me, when you're older and you're looking back, what are you going to tell your kids about this period of time? So I'm going to tell them what I told them in real time, that watching this insanity unfold is proof positive that sadly most adults are idiots. Like I'm not whitewashing this. This has made no sense. Children are at greater risk, sadly, from driving on a highway and getting into a car accident and dying than they are of catching the Wuhan virus and dying from it. Yes. That has been clear for a long time, right? And yet never before certainly in our history have aging adults asked children to sacrifice their lives so I might live a little longer. That is, to me, wasn't a policy decision. That is a morally abhorrent, evil act. And I don't know how, I can barely have polite conversations with people who, even if you thought in March and April 2020, when everything was hysteria, maybe that was okay. But anyone that kept the schools closed after the summer of 2020 is an idiot.
I agree. I mean, there's definitely a diabolical agenda at play, as you pointed out, and the burden we've placed on our kids and the mortality that they've suffered and the harm they've suffered from lockdowns, from being unable to communicate, from being left in some cases in abusive situations with no recourse. People with disabilities, we have in our son's first language was sign language. That's sign language, and we have a good friend who's deaf. You put a mask on, it removes
the ability to communicate.
Exactly. And so the psychological harm that we've inflicted on our kids and our youth is incalculable.
And that's absolutely true, right? For someone who's deaf and needs to be able to read lips. But the fact that in New York City today, this next idiot mayor is masking 3 and 4-year-olds. This is the time in your life where you develop normal human socialization. They can't see faces. They can't see expressions. And the fact that anyone puts up with this is madness. We had long debates here about, we saw the stupidity of remote learning, right? And fortunately, we've been blessed 3 healthy children who are all very, very intelligent, right? So, and I say that because, and in a home with enough computers and bandwidth, so they could actually go to school remotely, right? So that's again successful. Optimal conditions. Environment up. Optimal conditions. You're not worried about eating. You're not worried about living inside. You've got bandwidth. You can all of your own rooms. You can all study, right?
And my guess is you and your wife were involved too to make sure they were learning.
Exactly. All of that, the best possible circumstances you could have, and it was horrible for them, and their grades suffered. So if that's true. Start taking away economic security and everything else, and native talent and all that. And what we did, what politicians did to children in this country is unforgivable. Unforgivable.
Well, like you said before, there's no daylight between us on that. I completely agree.
I love that that's a part of your platform, because that's the first, maybe others are doing, but you're the first candidate I've heard who has said, I'm going to proactively prohibit this madness from ever happening again.
Yeah, well, you look at what's going on in Shanghai right now, where there's a new
Yeah.
variant of COVID, and they are literally locking down, like killing people's pets with shovels,
Yes.
and the insanity that's infested people with even small amounts of power is just it's obscene. And so we need to make sure that, and I love what Ron DeSantis did by making a stand for Florida, and we have to make sure it filters down to, Orange County, Brevard County, Seminole County, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And here, luckily, we're fairly fortunate in that Prerational Accounting. It's
Yeah,
a big, weird, spread out county, but because of a history of NASA here and a lot of high tech,
yeah,
very educated, but it spread, right? Blue collar all the way up to PhDs, right?
yeah.
But fairly rational. There was one school board member here who I swear she thought she was gonna like get a reality show or something, right? But because she made just a hue and a cry and a scream about this, and like would have dramatic press conferences, and went on like got finagled her way onto CNN, I think, to get interviewed by Chris Cuomo, which of course turned out to be, in retrospect, hilarious.
Yeah.
But like, but she happens to be my representative. Didn't respond to a single email or call from me. All the other board members did, who weren't actually my representatives. But the blatantness with which people like that seize this as an issue, there's nothing new under the sun, right? And so people saw
Right.
this as opportunistic. But so I'm glad on that. Now, in terms of one of the things I do know, or think I know, about Orange County is distinct from Brevard, is that there's always been, and now you're facing 1,000 new people a week or whatever coming in.
Yeah.
Is there anything, I don't want to pre-configure it, but is there anything that you think government could constructively do to make
That's a
it
great
easier to
question.
build more housing?
Yeah. So I think government can act as an important convener, and specifically around the affordable housing issue, because right now we have many malls that are vacant on busy commercial highways,
Mm.
and or half utilized. And so using the government convening power can bring in developers to talk about how to redevelop, and owners of those malls to start talking about, hey, what can we do in terms of streamlining permits, and in terms of different kinds of small bits of support to get you to rebuild and reconfigure these areas with infill housing, so that we can meet the housing crisis and also remove some of the blight to the city. So if you look at, there's a big road here called East Colonial Road. It's Route 50, and it has several malls that are between 80% to 50 to 80% vacant,
Right.
and huge amounts of space, lots of parking, all the infrastructures in, you have utilities, water, sewer. And so that's an economic opportunity where the government can play a facilitation role to make things happen.
Yeah, that makes sense, because a lot of that, the dynamics, of course, of real estate are always, the mullahs are constantly hoping for something to change in that.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if there's a set of incentives created, I think we're in line that, there's the worst words of the English language are hi, I'm for the government, I'm here to help you.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
but
yeah, and
to
with
the
good
small
reason.
extent where you can offer incentives to say, look, we've decided, I saw this work in Australia. We've decided that if something remains unoccupied for more than whatever the period of time is, it starts to attract the criminal element, starts to attract squatters and drug dealers and prostitutes, and we're going to start charging you to police that. Right.
Yeah,
All of a sudden, if the incentives go towards, it's not just I'm carrying at a slight loss, but it's now costing me, well, time to demolish and I can build apartment buildings. And if the city will give me a tax break for doing that, then great. I mean, that's the kind of stuff which can be done usefully.
yeah, absolutely. And there really is a housing crisis here in Orange County because of, the demand is bidding up prices as people move
Right.
in, and it's just a great private industry type solution where the government's not the doer, but the facilitator. And the challenge with people who have been in bureaucracy for so long, so my opponent has been a bureaucrat for 41 years, is they think of everything in terms of it's got to be a big government project, and of course we have to raise taxes to make that happen, and that's not necessary.
No, you just have to get out of the way.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's good. That's interesting. What's the most surprising thing you found so far? Having made this decision, declaring, leaping in, like what did you not expect at all that is now coming your way?
Yeah, so I've mentioned it before. I didn't expect that you're actually evaluated. It's almost like a scorecard, a grading system on how much money you're raising. And I always wondered about that when you'd see, like, they would mention some candidate, Marco Rubio, just using him for an example. Oh, and they'd always mention his fundraising, like he's at 5 million raised and 3 million in the bank, and so that was something that I have just come to learn and appreciate the importance of it. You meet a lot of good people a lot of the people I've met on this path are really good-hearted people who want the best for the country, particularly this new crop of politicians coming in. But then there are also some people who you have to be wary of, because they will come and offer to help you do X, Y, and Z without any real experience, or sometimes with a nefarious intent behind it. And so you really have to rely on your spidey sense.
I bet. A woman I spent some time with professionally, she was very funny. Been a lawyer in Florida for her whole life, native Floridian. I had worked in Tallahassee, and we were chatting about ethics rules. Yeah, and she could barely hold the water in her mouth. She was roaring so hard. She said ethics rules are designed by people with ethics for people who have no ethics, right? So she told a great story of they finally put term limits in for the legislature or the upper house, something a while ago, a few years ago. And she's like, this old crocodile who'd been there forever, like his grandpappy had been one of the senators, at the start of the state, whatever. He'd been there forever. Yeah, old guy. And they finally term limited him out. It took him forever. And he weaseled around. They grandfathered him in quite literally. And finally, he'd run out of all options. And he was out. He'd lost his seat. That was Friday. On Monday, she had to be in a meeting in the State House with another senator. Right. And she walked in, or a legislator, I don't know what they're called, and walked in, and there's the old crocodile sitting in the lobby as a greeter. So he's like a Walmart greeter on the goal of another politician.
Oh my goodness.
Or the greatest.
All he knows, right?
But it all comes down to what people want out of politics, right? When you poll people about Congress, it gets a 7% approval rating. When you ask about my guy, well, he's awesome. He brought stuff back from the district. Well, him bringing stuff back to the district in aggregate is why we're $900 quadrillion in debt. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, was it Mencken that said democracy is the idea that people get the government they ask for and get it good and hard? And so how do we reverse it? How do we, a new crop of politicians or people who are politically active, how do you change that? How do you get people to say about money? What do you do?
Term limits.
Term limits, that's part of it. But in general, like
term limits is part of it, because when you're term limited, it means that you can make the hard decisions that need to be made without worrying about the consequences of re-election. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is to get the right people in. Yeah. I would look for people who are not career politicians, who move from political office to political office. I think we need a crop more like Cincinnatus, if you're familiar with them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the story about Cincinnatus for your audience is he was a great Roman general, loved his farm, went back to plowing, and another war developed and they could find no leader to match him. So they went back to him and he left his plow and went back in service of his country. So I think we need leaders who approach it from that perspective, and we need leaders for whom Judeo-Christian values and constitutional principles are their defining their defining code.
That's interesting. I always find it easier to speak with religious people, irrespective of whether they're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu. But if anyone who's got a very serious conviction, I find I have a lot more in common with them than someone who's got more of a secular outlook. There are plenty of those people who are wonderful and they have a moral compass is great, but I think that in my experience, having seen a lot of different communities, those people who are most centered have a strong faith.
Yeah.
And therefore they have guidelines. They've got guidelines to behavior that they think are not just nice, not just relativistically philosophically interesting and beneficial, but are absolute. I think you're right. That degree of conviction, well, can be incredible.
Yeah, no, you said it, because if you believe there's a moral code that comes from a divine being or a supreme creator, then that puts constraints around you, but those constraints then give you freedom to operate within that limit, but you know where your limits are.
Yeah, there's some things that will come up. You're like, we just don't do that.
Yeah,
that's something we're going to do.
Something the means, the ends don't always justify the means. You have to make sure that the means you follow justify the ends that you're heading toward. And if you're a spiritual person, your end is not here. Your end is serving the divine creator.
Yeah, and making it all better here. Absolutely, I think that's a powerful message. I think I don't think that what you're expressing about getting the right people in, the challenge tactically is just because I watched a friend of mine in New York, Heshi Tishler, who was running for a seat on the city council.
Okay.
And again, business guy, property guy, right? Very religious man, Orthodox Jew, very religious guy. Family man, had taken in multiple orphans over the years, so done a huge amount for his community, broadly speaking, not just the Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn where he was, but everyone in that community, right? So kind of the ideal person you'd want to be looking after things. And as he himself tells it, right, he succumbed to the political machine without even knowing it. He got talked out of, long boring story, but he basically, someone in the machine managed to finagle him away, and so he lost. Right now he's he's running for another position. He's on fire, right? But the number of folks who across the country, I think, in pockets large and small, have allowed themselves to be succumbed by the siren's song of power. The very fact that, on a national level, very quickly, 51 formerly, to me, respected intelligence community leaders came out and said drunk, stoned, crazy Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian misinformation. That, to me, was terrifying. First off, the Department of Defense and intelligence communities have a long history of saying nothing about politics, and they violated that. And they violated it for an insane reason. But we're seeing more and more of that erosion, and I hope and I pray that more and more folks of conviction and faith will run and do it for the right reasons, because we are at a messy point in our history right now.
We are, and so hopefully we're at a point where we start to reclaim our republic, our constitutional republic. I think one of the reasons that we've gotten into trouble is because people of faith, typically they want to worship their God, they want to work hard, love their families, and be left alone.
Right.
And because we've wanted to be left alone, we've let other people who don't have the best intentions rise into positions of power, and then do things that are forced on us, that we can't, that we have to either comply with or resist. And so those things are being forced on us by our desire to be left alone. So I think maybe it's a rethinking of how we people of faith, conservatives, maybe need to think that, at some point in my life, I need to do a brief stint in public service.
I need to get involved. I need to stay aware and involved. I've been, for a range of reasons, I've always been politically active, with a lot of stuff in DC, but also just in general, sort of the ideal. You're supposed to pay attention to the things that matter around you, and the number of people that I think are great folks. They're hardworking, they're family people or not, who say to me, I'm not interested in politics. And I always respond to them. I said, that's like living in a cardboard box on a beach in Florida with a force 5 hurricane coming at you saying, I'm not interested in the weather.
Yeah.
You may not be interested in it, but it's coming
Yeah,
for
but
you.
it's going to come and get, that's a great analogy. I
Like,
love that.
I'm not interested. Who do you
Yeah.
think sets your property? I said it in New York on Long Island for a long time, had the highest property taxes. And this is under a Republican dominated one party government in Nassau in the 60s,
Yeah.
70s, and 80s, skyrocketing property taxes. And with a voter participation of 11%. Like 89% of you are just sitting there going, God, I hate that my taxes went up. I guess I can't do anything. Yeah, you could go vote.
Yeah.
So how do you, the position you're in of running, how do you get past that apathy and tell them to take 5 minutes a day to stop staring at TikTok and pay attention to the people that are going to increase your costs, increase your regulations, mask your kids? How do you break through that apathy?
So, I think that's where people like us who care about the future of the country have to, maybe we have an educational responsibility to talk to our neighbors and our friends and tell them, share with them the different ways they can get involved, from, starting with being a poll watcher or a poll worker. So
Right.
poll workers paid, and a poll watcher is somebody who watches on the day of the election. That's a very defined thing you can do that's critically important for the health and safety of the republic. You can get involved in your precinct, whether it's Republican or Democratic. On the Republican side, there's an organization called precinctstrategy.com. I don't know if you've heard of it. So
I like that. Precinctstrategy.com. That's smart.
Yeah. A guy named Dan Schultz started it, and it's a way of helping people who haven't been involved in politics get involved at a precinct level. They can become a precinct captain and then have the ability to direct kind of the future of the party, and then make sure that there are good candidates being put forward. So there are things like that. Running for school board. School board's the ultimate local position.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And you can do that by starting to go attend these school board meetings and seeing what's being talked about and seeing what the issues are, and then participating and then running. And you see there's a trajectory of just really great candidates that are getting involved, particularly mothers. And, we've seen out here, there are just some really involved mothers who started coming to the school board because they didn't like the forced masking, the closures, CRT being taught in the schools, all those things we've talked about, who became advocates and now suddenly have decided, not suddenly, but have evolutionarily decided that we need to put our hat into the ring because we need to make a difference.
Yes. No, that's very smart. Well, I'm delighted to have met you. I look forward to continuing the conversation. And anyone named Chris Messina getting to higher office just makes me all the happier.
Yeah.
I look forward to being confused for the mayor of Orange County constantly. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, that sounds good. Well, we'll look forward to hosting you. It'll be a lot of fun. Christopher Messina hosts Chris Messina, or vice versa. However,
vice versa. It's perfect.
Yeah.
All I ask is that I'm not hassled if I drive a little fast through the county.
Yeah. If my wife ever says to me, why can't you grow sideburns? I can say at least one Christopher Messina can.
There you go. I will take on the burden for us both. But Chris, it's a real pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much. I'll put your link down and below. We'll send it out to everyone. Is there any sort of last guiding thought? What's your elevator pitch? You got 12 seconds with someone. What do you tell them? What on earth should they be focused on to improve this country?
Yeah, the message I would say is really get involved. If you see something that's wrong, that you don't like, that you think could be changed, be the change. Be the change. Get involved. Go to your school board. Become a precinct captain. Find a candidate of choice. If you're in Orange County, I hope you'll support me at chrismessina.com. But find a candidate that's committed to making a difference, and then stay involved with them. Hold them to account for their decisions.
Couldn't put it better. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We'll close as we always do. So glad to have had Chris Messina here. We look forward to him becoming the mayor of Orange County, Florida. And until next time, as we constantly tell our listeners, save yourselves the headache, turn off the mainstream media. They're lying to you. And if you need something to really look into reality and understand the world around you, tune into Messy Times.